All right, we've got a few extra folks rolling in, but I'll get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome to IFMA's World Workplace 2020 Roundtable discussion for capital expenditure I want versus I need. As the name implies, today we'll look at some aspects of CapEx that are not necessarily automated or regularly scheduled, but instead represent potential financial outlays resulting from newly identified asks at any level. My name is David Deckert. I manage IFMA's instructor program. IFMA has roughly 100 qualified instructors and registered facilitators who are approved to teach our course content across the globe, whether in person or virtually in some cases. I am their liaison and their first resource. And more publicly, I also moderate our virtual CFM exam prep workshops. I have a few housekeeping tasks and expectations to share for this roundtable before we begin. As a reminder, this live session is being recorded for possible inclusion at the World Workplace site and on IFMA's YouTube channel. Today's guest facilitators and I consider each of you equal partners in this discussion. Your questions and curiosities will be considered open for answer by anyone here. Whether you came here to glean some tips and tricks from industry leaders or simply to commiserate among like-minded FMs in our ongoing budget challenges, I know each of you have something to contribute. So your engagement is both welcomed and encouraged. The webinar platform here offers a chat window that you may use, of course, and a reactions feature if you'd like to give a simple thumbs up as a response. And we like to see who you are, just as we would if this roundtable were in person. So please turn on your webcam. Don't be shy. We are here today as cohorts to learn and to share. We will do our best to convene on time so that you all may move on to other areas of World Workplace you may be interested in experiencing this afternoon. And finally, there are 4 other roundtables happening elsewhere at the same time as this one. We are gratified you are here, which in a way represents yet another kind of want versus need choice. Now I'd like to briefly introduce you to our 3 facilitators for this roundtable. We have brought together thought leaders who partner with IFMA to help fund the research, benchmarking, and education products that FMs depend on. Examples of such contributions could appear in our knowledge library as white papers, case studies, or in our FMJ publication. Adrian Weygandt is Managing Director Americas at Spacewell, a global technology and consulting firm involved in all aspects of facility design, building performance, and maintenance, as well as the occupant experience. It is an understatement to say that Adrian is well-versed in negotiating the often competing goals of want versus need in the FM sphere. Lisa McDaniel is one of Republic Services' senior sales managers, tasked with developing and leading her teams to top performance in the recycling and waste industry. Our reality as humans is that waste removal and recycling are endeavors that aren't going to cease. Lisa's experience has brought her into areas as diverse as fleet renewal and automation for the types of trucks you may see in your neighborhood each week to all facets of corporate and individual sustainability efforts. Jim Himsel is a regional sales manager for Excel Dryer, responsible for a wide variety of sales relationships involving distribution, contracting, and of course, how all of that impacts end users, some of which have no doubt been you at one time or another. Our basic task of hand washing and drying has understandably taken on increased significance this year. And Jeff offers his unique perspective here for how you may approach your own challenges when achieving your expenditure goals. We have a few discussion questions submitted by some folks in attendance. Thank you. But before we jump into those, I'd like to open the floor to anyone who did not submit a topic question to me ahead of time. What's your burning question or hot button issue regarding expenditures? Anybody at all want to jump in? John, I know you had some, so you don't get to ask your question right now. Anybody have anything on their mind they want to make sure we talk about? Nobody's brave. All right. That's fine. We will get rolling here. Can you all hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Cool. All right. All right. Well, let's start with one of the questions that was submitted. You know, and I'll say before we start that some of these questions that you all may have or some of the topics that we may cover can be very broad in general, or they may be very specific, or both. It doesn't matter. Anything is open here. So here's a question that was submitted. How would a facility manager quantify the want versus the need? In other words, how do you put a number to it perhaps? What sort of metrics might be used? Who would like to tackle that? Anybody have a thought process for identifying want versus need or quantifying it?
Well, I mean, I can take that.
Sure.
So I come from a software field. So in our case, it's really, we have a broad range of different products. And what we ultimately try and do when communicating with the client is determine, what is the ultimate goal? And this is where you try and align want and need. And in our case, if we're talking space management software, it's really generating return on investment. So we find out exactly what the current status of the space usage is, what the benchmarks are, and then how much you could be improving. And then if we can see that the investment in our software solution would generate a positive return just mathematically, then you know that it makes sense. So you have that want covered with an equation effectively. So we always try and quantify it. Now it gets a little bit more tricky if you're looking at different product lines where you're looking at the employee experience, because there it's hard to quantify a real return. And then that's where you have to ask yourself the question, is it something I really need? Does it really tackle the issue at hand, or is it something that you just want? And so bringing those two together is really kind of the goal of every discussion with the client.
Right. So you've got some things that are regimented, like you said, and some things that obviously aren't, especially when people, right, come into play. How do you, Adrian, typically see, for lack of a better description, the meeting of the minds as far as that goes? In other words, how do you resolve those two? What are some techniques that you might have for that?
Well, it's very product specific, but oftentimes what a client will want is the employee experience, something that really gets the buy-in from the end user. So like you need to show them the value of the software, not just to quantify the fact that we're going to be saving you money, but actually generate additional value for them. And at that point, if we look at how the space is being used and figure out how to optimize that, oftentimes that involves going from kind of a static workplace concept where everyone has their assigned seats to a more dynamic concept where you don't have assigned seating. And so this is then where you can kind of start explaining to the client that if you do not have the technology to supplement that transition to a hybrid work style, you're going to lose productivity because people will spend time kind of looking for a vacant spot. They're not going to find their colleagues and so on. And so there you can again make the use case, the fact that you're going to be maintaining or sometimes even gaining productivity while improving the employee experience by giving them a mobile app with which they can then book tickets and find their colleagues and find vacant workspaces. So there are kind of tricks to bridge that, to really find out, what is it that you're trying to achieve? Are you just trying to get the employees to feel happy at work? What is the point behind that? Is that to get them to come into the office? Is that to retain talent? Is that to position yourself as kind of a thought leader and acquire talent? So for every one of those questions, there is a way to really quantify the value. And, I often challenge the client on what it is that they're actually trying to achieve. One of the big topics now is comfort and wellness. I mean, everybody wants to have comfort sensors and well-being in their office, but then the question is, okay, if you have all that data, what are you going to do with it? And if there's no answer to that question, then that's not something you need, it's something you want. And then the question is, why do you want it? So it's kind of going down that rabbit hole and trying to help the client really determine for themselves whether they need it or want it.
Yeah, I was going to ask you how much of an interview situation is involved in that case, because you need to basically suss out kind of what's beyond and what's behind what they're asking for, right? And to some extent, that's going to tell you maybe how important it is, or what sort of priority it is, or if it's just sort of spitballing an idea, right?
Well, yeah, and in our specific case, the product offering is so broad that you need to have those discussions in the first place anyway, to make sure that you're not selling them like everything that they don't need, because ultimately you want the client to be happy and actually get, you know, a worthwhile solution. So that process is already baked into the whole communications process. But it's just important in general to make sure that the client is getting what he really needs, plus ideally what he wants.
Right. They don't need to see the full menu. They need to see what applies to them in the best possible way. Let me ask you sort of the same question, Jeff. What are some of the things that you have come across in that way for identifying wants versus needs in your own line of work?
Thanks, David. Yeah, so we come from an industry where there's really no way around the fact that when you have a restroom, and every facility does, everyone needs to use the restroom, you need to provide some way to dry hands. So whether you're going to go with a paper towel based system or a hand dryer system, an electric hand dryer system, you know, either is going to, from a baseline point of view, solve your problem. So you can check your need box there. Then the question becomes, well, within that framework, there are a number of wants. What, you know, you have to ask yourself certain questions. What kind of traffic flow do you have through your restroom? Are there things that you would need in addition to just drying hands? Are there other needs within the restroom? Very often the configuration of the restroom itself will help make that determination. Mm-hmm. So within the context of we need to have a system in our restroom to dry hands, you then have a series of wants that can be addressed. So the good news with hand dryers is that the technology has gotten infinitely better. And we're providing a lot of solutions that paper towels simply can't. And I know we were talking earlier that there's a lot of information out there, especially in the age of COVID, about things like hygienic efficacy and cost analysis and carbon footprint. And so when you take all those different factors into play, it really can then you can start to distill out, well, we know we need to dry 100 people or 1,000 people's hands per day. What's going to be the most cost-effective, best system we can use, you know, in terms of it's environmentally friendly and it's going to give our users a good experience in the restroom.
Right. When you talk to these folks, Jeff, how do you go through a similar process of Adrian, where you sort of find what they think they know, you know, versus what they don't know? In other words, they're not just coming to you for a price quote to dry their hands. They need to have it done in a certain way. So do you find out from them more of what their priorities are, or is it something they just don't know until you speak to them?
No, that's a great question. Very much so. And one of the things I always like to lead our discussions off with is really understanding the history of their facility and understanding, well, hey, you know, why do you have paper towels in your restroom? Is it because that's what you've always had? And it's kind of an if it ain't broke, don't fix it mentality. And if that's the case, then have you considered other options and why or why not? And certainly really trying to drill into understanding the meaning behind the meaning. I know it sounds maybe more complicated than it needs to be. We're talking about, you know, paper towels or an electric hand dryer, but at the same time, you can really understand, hey, why have you made the decisions that you have to get you to this point? And if you are considering a switch, say from paper to an electric hand dryer, what are the things that are important to you? Is it that it's a touchless system? Is it that it is a fast system? We know that people are going to stand in front of a hand dryer for about 15 seconds. You need to make sure that you have a system in place that's going to make, you know, do it fast enough that they're going to walk away with dry hands, because that's really important, especially in the age of COVID, to have those dry hands, because wet hands spread 1,000 times more bacteria and pathogens. So you need to kind of check some of those boxes and really get into that. Is it a healthcare facility where there's a very high level of standard for hygiene, or is it maybe, you know, a different kind of facility where maybe they don't have to have the same rigorous standard? That being said, we offer a lot of different options that will check even those boxes as well.
So it sounds like the more they know, the better informed they are, the better chance they have of getting their own priorities probably aligned and communicated with whomever their decision makers may be.
That's right.
Same question to you, Lisa. In your line of work, what kinds of ways do you have when you identify wants versus needs within your own organization?
So, you know, listening to Adrian and Jeff both, and having been in sales now for 30 some odd years, it's a matter of asking the right questions, right? And going back into the customer approach, whenever you're sitting in front of the customer, you're trying to uncover exactly what the needs are versus the wants. And so through a series of questions, you can determine that. You know, whenever I look at it from actually an asset direction here with Republic, it's for instance, you've got a truck that has a lifespan of roughly 15 years. You're getting to that 15-year mark. I know some general managers that say we can keep that truck on the road because they don't want to reach out to try to get some more capital because they think they're going to be told no. But then the maintenance costs that they're spending on those trucks outweighs what the actual cost would be for us to finance the CapEx. So you've got to balance it, and you've got to lead your customers to that that determination as well. So whenever I'm sitting there talking to a general manager, it's, so how much are you spending on maintenance on that truck? You know, what is your route cost per day? What, you know, as far as your inventory to fix the truck, how much inventory are you having to maintain on the shelves just in order to keep that truck in the road? So it's a lot of questions like that. And once again, that pertains whether it's an internal situation, like what you may find yourself at your business, but then it also could be external whenever you're going out and trying to sell your product to the customers.
Right. So in your line of work, it sounds like you've got a situation where some folks may want to be renewing and some folks may want to sort of be standing pat. And so the message that you give to them is not always, you know, buy, or keep. It's going to be dependent on their situation, their needs, and some other factors. I think that's important because, you know, most of the folks that are on this call, and myself included, are not in sales. But we know either from past experience or in our own relationships, it's not enough to have a sales goal. It's not enough to have any kind of a hard goal. You have to have some reasons behind it that can populate, right, to other folks in order to get what you want in the way that you want. That's kind of what makes the world go around, right? It's not just I want it, so therefore give it to me. You've got to have some justification for it that is not just for you, but also applies to whomever you may be, you know, seeking the information. Okay, I want to ask or bring to highlight the question in the chat room here. He says, the best way to approach an organization that has more facility than they need, but still may be taken care of. So I'm guessing the question here is, how do you approach it? What things do you look for? When do you pull the plug? So you're asking a size question, a capacity question. That I'm guessing is based on changing needs or something that has changed that may or may not be within the initial plan, let's say, right? So who is anybody here on the call that has come across something like that, where they've hit a situation where just the raw facility size or the grounds that they're working on has become untenable, it's too large, too small, something that didn't fall within the plan?
You know, I've experienced some customers that by chance, it's a big facility. They're having to downsize and they're wanting to figure out, I mean, and this sounds really simplistic, right, guys? So where are they going to put their compactor? Where are they going to put their container? So thinking it through, what's going to make the most sense is going to be where's their biggest point of generation. So, looking at Jeff's products that he sells, you may have 1/3 of the facilities shut down. Do you really need that extra dryer in that bathroom that nobody's ever going to visit anymore? So it's all about where are your people going to be located, and in my opinion, what's going to be the most efficient for them. Because regardless of what kind of work you're in, you don't want somebody walking 3 miles just to go to the bathroom. You want them to go to the bathroom and get back, or you want them to go put the trash outside and get back. So it's all a matter of your point of generation. And if everybody's spread across the facility, then it probably would make more sense, and you could do time studies to actually consolidate and have people all in one area. I don't know if that's answering your question or not, but that was just kind of my thoughts.
Well, he's smiling, so I'm guessing that answers his question, at least to some extent, right? All right.
It's really more a matter of areas where you have old equipment that is approaching its end of life, and convincing the organization that you either need to replace it or plan on doing a lot of extra maintenance. And I think that the idea of coming up with the expanded or extensive operating expense and being able to evaluate that against the cost of the capital expenditure is probably the best answer. But I like the other idea too of consolidating or just cutting back on the amount of investment that you're making in keeping, for instance, scattered restrooms available, even if there aren't very many people in that area.
But on that front, I mentioned before that we offer a lot of different solutions. And so one of them, or we have computer-aided facility management solutions, we have CMMS, IWMS. So it's kind of a situation that we run into quite frequently, but we have all the data on that. So because you have all the maintenance plans and the inventories and everything in the system, you can very easily quantify, like, these areas are costing you an arm and a leg to maintain. You'd be better off replacing them if you compare them to benchmarks that we have across the industry, or the maintenance cost of your newer objects somewhere else in your facilities. So that we really can quantify it. So it's really relatively easy going to the client and showing them, you see the degradation over time. Once you hit this point, it makes more sense to replace it with something new. But we also see, in a similar vein, is that you have large facilities. You don't have that many people in there right now because of COVID, for example. And you have a heightened need to clean stuff, to disinfect stuff, but you have a finite amount of technicians and janitors to really deal with it. So you don't want to hire a bunch of people in addition, because it might just be a short-term thing. So we have all of these different solutions, from smart building solutions where you put sensors and hardware, like retrofit old buildings with hardware, so you can determine how the space is being used, and then you can adjust all these schedules based off of usage. So if there's certain parts of the building that are not being used, you can then not send the janitors or the technicians into that area as frequently, and then focus it on where you do have the people coming in, so you can make your processes smarter to adjust to that specific hopefully short-term need. So there are a lot of different ways of adjusting it. Oftentimes it's also just, why is it an issue? Is it getting too expensive? Does it need to be replaced? Is it not being used? And all those things, as long as you can quantify them, as long as you have the numbers somewhere, it's a relatively easy discussion to have.
Sort of classic asset management scenario. Let me ask you, Adrian, how does sustainability enter into what you just said, and into some of those choices?
I mean, ultimately, we're all about improving efficiency. So if you're talking in the energy aspect, we reduce overhead by putting air pressure sensors into buildings. You can make sure that you're not losing heat due to incorrect pressurization of the HVAC systems. Again, the product range is so broad that obviously every efficiency improvement leads to gains when you're talking about sustainability long term. But we've also seen, kind of interestingly, a little bit of a drop in interest in that topic since COVID started, because certain things kind of overrides the the good intentions that were going into this year.
Well, that was my next question, because, you know, when we talk about sustainability, oftentimes we're framing it in the long term, right? It's sometimes very hard to conceptualize what a great short-term benefit sustainability is going to be. It's almost counterintuitive. It doesn't really make any sense. So if you're in a situation where people aren't even back to work yet, and you're talking about sustainability, that could be sort of a hard sell. I brought it up because this notion of how do you quote unquote sell things to people, meaning how do you get what you want? How do you get that expenditure? How do you get that line item added to your budget and so on? It's you know, we're here to talk about, I called it tips and tricks earlier, but it's technique, it's identifying, you know, all sorts of things. And it's a common thing folks want to know. Jeff, do you have anything to add about that as well?
Yeah, sustainability certainly in our industry is very important. I know that in the past, you know, certainly prior to the COVID era, was certainly one of the top topics of discussion with facility managers. I know that, you know, you kind of evaluate your current system in terms of cost, sustainability, hygienic efficacy. So typically it's one of the top points of discussion across the board. You know, you look at competing systems and how sustainable are they? How are they going to affect your carbon footprint? Is there a way to get those need projects to align with a way where you can lower your carbon footprint without sacrificing on the cost or the hygiene aspect as well? And so I have found that in the past, it's been a very important topic. It's something that's relatively easy to implement from our point of view. And it's certainly something that I think generally people want to do the right thing. And if given two options that are, you know, have different approaches to how they can affect your overall carbon footprint, typically people are going to be inclined to want to choose the way that is going to be a more positive impact.
Right. And I know, Lisa, that sustainability is a big part of Republic Services. It's all over your website. Right? So, you know, the same question is kind of, you know, long-term versus short-term. You can frame it in a lot of different ways for returns and other things, but how has Republic, what's their focus? And I mean, we know they are obviously very attracted to sustainability. There are finite resources for everything. What has been their focus, and how has that kind of dovetailed into, you know, making decisions for capital that you wouldn't have otherwise have done, say, maybe 10 or 15 years ago?
So personal experience is Plano, Texas had a recycling center at Republic's location. December 28th, it burned to the ground.
Oh, wow.
So at that point in time was whenever the commodity market was beginning to take a nosedive. And, you know, the corporate office at that point in time was faced with, do we rebuild or do we not? So what they did and what we helped them with was we looked at the market. There's a lot of recyclables that come out of the Dallas-Fort Worth market, and the existing recycling centers, both the competitors and our other one in Fort Worth, were at max capacity, but there was still public hollering wanting, you know, additional recycling capabilities. So the company determined that they would rebuild, and so they reopened in a year after it burnt to the ground, and that recycling center reopened at max capacity. So, you know, with the recycling market being similar to the stock market, I mean, you've got to look at it for the long-term goal. You can't look at it as a short-term goal. I look at sustainability procedures and processes that people have put in place at these different facilities and different plants. We're not doing it just for an initial 1 or 2 month period. You're looking at it on a long-term basis, because let's face it, costs are not going to decrease. They're just going to continue to increase over the course of the years. So it behooves all of us, including a trash and recycling company, to make sure that there's the capabilities available. So anything from, eliminating paper towels to working with Adrian's group to put sensors on lights and whatever may be to make sure that you're getting the best out of your facility. That's being a good partner to the environment. And so definitely we have to look at it as a long-term investment.
There's almost no other choice, is there?
Correct.
Okay, we've got a few minutes left. I want to ask one specific question that was submitted, and I'm going to read it almost verbatim here. And it says, I'm interested in learning more about common financial hurdle rates and how organizations approach CapEx overall. Is it net present value? What discount rates matter, and how does simple payback period come into play? That's a mouthful. Does anybody want to tackle that? I can read it again. I'm interested in learning more about common financial hurdle rates. I'm going to be honest, I don't know what a hurdle rate is, and how organizations approach CapEx overall. Is it net present value? What discount rates matter, and how does simple payback period come into play? Does any of that affect our three facilitators directly or indirectly?
I can honestly say I'm not at that level of the organization, so I can't
Okay.
address that.
All right. Well, I just thought I would mention it because it was submitted.
Well,
right.
in our specific case, because we do software, it's not quite so much of an issue.
Okay.
And a lot of the software that we do sell has a really, really fast return on investment. So oftentimes you're going to have huge gains within the first year. So that changes the calculations pretty significantly when you're talking to the CFOs and so on, because I'm just going to use like a random example from this year, actually. A company with a static seating plan just put sensors in their building, wanted to find out how the space is being used, and they went from 135,000 square feet down to 80,000 square feet just based off of their usage without us really changing anything. And so with an investment of 100 and something thousand, they're saving about 5 million a year. So there you don't really get into all these big hurdles because the initial cost relative to the size of the company is minimal, and the savings are massive, and those were projected ahead of time. So you get around most of these hurdles, and obviously you don't have any physical assets that are tying up any funds. So it makes it a little bit easier too.
So it's more straightforward.
Hey, I'm Denise Martin from San Antonio.
Hi,
a hurdle rate is the minimum rate of return on a project or investment required by a manager or investor. I had no idea what that was either.
Fair enough. Okay. All right, folks. Well, that about wraps up our time today. I want to thank you all for joining and participating. And thank you all to our facilitators. The conversation does not end here. We will have some information in the knowledge library. And for those of you who have agreed to make your contact information